I needed silence, the kind that wraps around your shoulders like an old coat, heavy and familiar. My apartment had become too small for my thoughts, too cluttered with the voices of people who wanted things from me. So I opened my laptop that Tuesday morning, still in pajamas, coffee growing cold beside the window. The travel website glowed against the gray light filtering through my curtains. I scrolled through coastal inns, places where I could write without interruption, where I could breathe without explaining why I needed to. My finger hovered over a listing. The Sea Haven Inn, simple, clean, overlooking water that promised no answers, only movement. I clicked to check availability. The calendar loaded slowly, each date appearing like a hesitant confession. I selected 3 nights in October, clicked the room option, a corner suite on the 5th floor. The price appeared, $218 total. I reached for my credit card. My email chimed. The notification floated across my screen like a leaf settling on still water. Booking confirmation, Sea Haven Inn, October 15th to 18th. Same dates, same room, same price, down to the exact dollar amount I'd just calculated but never submitted. I stared at the sender. Reservations at seahaveninn.com, a legitimate address from a hotel I'd never contacted. The timestamp read yesterday, 4:37 in the afternoon. But yesterday I was at work. Yesterday I didn't know this place existed. My hands felt strange against the keyboard. I refreshed my email. The confirmation remained, stubborn as a stain. I checked my browser history. No record of completing a booking. No saved passwords for their website. No cookies suggesting I'd been there before this moment. The reservation number looked real. A string of letters and numbers that meant nothing and everything. I copied it, returned to the hotel website, and pasted it into their lookup system. Valid reservation. Payment confirmed via a credit card number that matched mine exactly, except the transaction never appeared in my online banking. I called the hotel. The phone rang 3 times before a woman answered. Her voice sounded like she was speaking through water. Sea Haven Inn, how may I help you? I have a question about a reservation, I said. My voice felt smaller than usual. What's the confirmation number? I read it to her. She hummed softly, typing. Yes, here it is. Room 503, corner suite, 3 nights. Is there something you need to change? When was this booking made? Yesterday afternoon, 4:37. Is there a problem with the dates? I hung up without answering. The phone felt heavier when I set it down. Outside, rain began tapping against the window like fingers drumming on wood, like someone waiting for me to notice they were there. I stared at my laptop screen. The booking page still showed the same room available, as if I could book it again, as if I hadn't already been expected. I scrolled down to read the hotel's cancellation policy. No charges if canceled within 24 hours. But 24 hours from when? From a booking I never made? From a decision I hadn't finished thinking? My coffee had gone completely cold. I wrapped my hands around the mug anyway, needing something solid to hold, something that behaved the way it should. The ceramic was real. The coffee was real. The email in my inbox was real too, sitting there like a door I hadn't opened yet, but somehow already walked through. I packed lighter than I'd planned. Just enough clothes for 3 days. My notebook, a pen that wrote smoothly, kind of essentials you bring when you're not sure what you're walking into, but you're walking anyway. I folded everything carefully, as if the precision might make sense of what didn't. The confirmation email never disappeared. Every time I checked, it remained exactly where it had settled, patient as a spider in the corner of a room, waiting for me to understand that some invitations arrive before you know you need them. Some doors open before you reach for the handle. I zipped my suitcase shut and placed it by the door. Tomorrow I would drive to a place I'd never been, to claim a room I'd never booked, to meet whatever had been expecting me long enough to send the paperwork in advance. The rain continued its patient tapping. I left my laptop open, the confirmation email glowing like a small lighthouse in the growing darkness of my apartment, guiding me towards something I couldn't name but could no longer avoid. Morning arrived wrapped in mist that clung to the city like a secret being whispered. I stood on the corner with my suitcase, watching gray tendrils curl around streetlights that hadn't yet surrendered to daylight. The air tasted of salt despite being miles from any ocean. Everything felt suspended between what was and what might be. A yellow cab materialized through the fog, as if summoned by my presence. The driver pulled to the curb before I raised my hand, before I even stepped toward the street. His window was already down, and he nodded once, a gesture that said he recognized me, though I'd never seen his face. The old inn by the coast, right? His voice carried an accent I couldn't place, something that might have been Irish or Scottish or simply old. He didn't look at me when he spoke, just tapped the meter and waited. I hesitated. The listing had called it Sea Haven Inn. Nothing about being old, nothing about coast, though I'd seen water in the photographs. I need to go to Sea Haven Inn, I said, opening the passenger door. Do you know it? Course I do. He pulled away before I'd fully settled into the seat. Been taking folks there for years. Always the same room, too. 503, corner suite. My seatbelt clicked with a sound too loud for the quiet morning. How did you know that? But he was humming now, a tune that seemed familiar and completely foreign at the same time. Something that might have been a lullaby if lullabies were meant to comfort the dead instead of the sleeping. His fingers drummed against the steering wheel in rhythm, following notes I couldn't quite catch. I watched his eyes in the rearview mirror, dark brown, steady, focused on the road ahead. But they never blinked. Not when we stopped at traffic lights. Not when other cars honked or swerved. Not when the sun finally broke through the mist and filled the cab with sudden brightness. His gaze remained fixed and unblinking, as if blinking might break whatever spell was carrying us forward. The city dissolved behind us gradually. Buildings gave way to trees, then fields, then stretches of land that looked like they'd been waiting centuries for someone to notice them. The radio played softly, static mixed with classical music that sounded recorded underwater, violins that seemed to be drowning. First time visiting? He asked after an hour of silence. Yes, I realized I was whispering. I think so. Think so? He chuckled, but the sound had no warmth in it. Most people know if they've been somewhere before. I stared out the window at landscape that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. Rolling hills that might have appeared in dreams I'd forgotten. Farmhouses that looked abandoned but somehow expectant. as if their previous occupants had simply stepped out and might return any moment. The inn's been there longer than most folks realize, he continued. His humming resumed, threading between his words like smoke. Built on older ground, much older. Some places call to certain people. Some people get called whether they want to be or not. My phone showed no signal. Hadn't for the past 30 minutes. The landscape outside offered no landmarks I recognized. No signs indicating distance to anywhere I'd heard of. Just empty road stretching toward a horizon that seemed to retreat as we approached it. How much farther? I asked. Time moves different out here. Could be minutes, could be hours. Depends on how ready you are to arrive. His hands never shifted position on the steering wheel. 10 and 2, exactly as driver's education instructed decades ago. But his knuckles were too white, his grip too tight for someone simply following familiar roads. And still, those eyes never blinked, never wavered from whatever destination he was navigating toward. The humming grew louder as the road narrowed. Trees pressed closer to both sides, their branches forming a canopy that filtered sunlight into patterns that moved like water. The music on the radio faded to pure static, then silence. Only the humming remained, filling the space between us like fog. I tried to call my sister. No signal. Tried to check my location on the map application. The screen showed only blue, as if we were floating somewhere above the earth instead of driving across it. The battery icon displayed full charge, but the time had stopped advancing. Still showed the moment I'd gotten into the cab. Almost there now, he said, though I could see nothing ahead but more trees, more road that curved into shadows. The inn knows you're coming. Been preparing your room for a while now, making sure everything's exactly as it should be. The humming stopped. The sudden silence felt heavier than the music had. In the quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat, could hear the subtle sound of my breathing, could hear something else too. Something that might have been another voice, very faint, coming from the direction we were traveling, calling my name in a tone I almost recognized but couldn't quite place. The cab stopped in front of a building that shouldn't have existed yet somehow did. 3 stories of weathered brick and windows that caught sunlight like eyes blinking awake. Ivy climbed the walls in patterns that looked deliberate, as if someone had trained it to grow in specific shapes. The sign by the entrance read, Sea Haven Inn, in letters that might have been carved yesterday or a century ago. I paid the driver, but he waved away my money. Already taken care of, he said, still not looking directly at me. Enjoy your stay. Room 503 will suit you perfectly. Before I could ask what he meant, he drove away. The sound of his engine faded quickly, swallowed by silence that felt almost solid. I stood on the gravel driveway, suitcase handle warm in my palm, studying a building that looked exactly like the photographs, but felt completely different. Older, more patient, as if it had been waiting much longer than the internet listing suggested. The front door opened before I reached it. A woman emerged, small and soft-looking, wearing a pale cardigan that might have been blue or gray, depending on the light. Her hair curled around her face in a way that made her seem familiar, though I was certain we'd never met. She smiled with the kind of warmth that feels practiced. "You must be here for room 503, she said. walking toward the desk that sat in what served as a lobby. Top floor. It's our quietest room. Perfect for writing. I hadn't mentioned writing. Hadn't mentioned it to the cab driver, to the hotel, to anyone. But she slid a brass key across the wooden counter before I could respond. The metal felt warm against my fingertips, as if someone had been holding it tightly for a long time, warming it specifically for my arrival. I should check in first, I said, though she seemed to have already decided the formalities were complete. Oh, you're all set. Payment processed yesterday. Everything's ready. Her eyes were the color of sea glass, pale and translucent. They fixed on mine with a steadiness that made looking away difficult. The elevator's just there, 5th floor. You can't miss it. The key was heavier than modern hotel keys, substantial, the kind that required actual locks instead of electronic sensors. The room number was engraved in script that looked hand-carved. 503. The brass was warm and getting warmer, as if responding to my touch. I walked to the elevator without pressing the call button. The doors opened immediately, revealing an interior lined with dark wood and mirrors that reflected everything slightly wrong. My suitcase looked smaller in the reflection. My face appeared younger, though the lighting couldn't account for the difference. The elevator began rising before I selected a floor. The hallway on the 5th floor stretched longer than the building's exterior suggested possible. Rooms numbered in brass plates that matched my key: 501, 502, and then 503 at the very end, beside a window that showed nothing but gray sky. The key slid into the lock like it belonged there, had always belonged there. The mechanism turned with a soft click that sounded like recognition, like something saying, "Yes, finally, you're here." My room was exactly as I'd imagined it would be. Beige bedspread tucked with military precision, curtains drawn across windows that promised a view of water, a small desk positioned near the window, already equipped with hotel stationery and a pen that wrote in blue ink. Everything clean and waiting, but the mirror near the closet showed something different. A room with wallpaper instead of painted walls. Wallpaper covered in tiny flowers that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. No suitcase visible in the reflection. No me at first. Just a chair positioned facing the window, as if someone had been sitting there moments before I arrived. I waved at the mirror. My reflection waved back, but the background remained unchanged. Floral wallpaper where plain walls should be. A different carpet, a different arrangement of furniture. I stepped closer to the glass, studying the reflected room that existed somewhere else while occupying the same space as mine. Behind the curtain in the mirror, something moved. Not dramatically, just a subtle shift in the fabric, as if someone had brushed against it from the other side. But my curtains hung perfectly still. When I reached toward them, my reflection reached too, but the curtain in the mirror moved independently, responding to something I couldn't see. I tested the mirror with different movements, jumped once, turned the lights on and off, sat on the bed, then stood again. My reflection followed every action perfectly, but the room in the mirror remained consistently different, consistently occupied by someone or something that cast no reflection of its own. The brass key had grown warm enough to feel uncomfortable in my pocket. I set it on the desk beside the hotel stationery, where it continued radiating heat like a small engine. Outside, afternoon was fading, though I'd arrived in morning. Time seemed negotiable here, flexible enough to accommodate whatever schedule the inn preferred. I left the bathroom light on that night, not because I was afraid of the dark, but because darkness in this room felt too complete, too eager to fill spaces that should remain visible. The mirror caught the light and threw it back wrong, creating shadows in places where shadows made no sense. But at least with the light on, I could see what was happening, could watch the reflection of a room I wasn't staying in, where someone else might be watching back. Sleep came in fragments that night. Each time I drifted off, I woke to the sound of someone moving in the walls. Not footsteps exactly, more like fabric rustling, like someone changing clothes in a space that existed parallel to mine. I lay still and listened, tracking the movement from corner to corner of a room that might have been mine, but probably wasn't. Morning light filtered through curtains I didn't remember closing. The mirror near the closet still showed its alternate version of my space. Floral wallpaper that seemed more vivid now, as if sunlight was reaching it from a different angle. The chair in the reflection had moved closer to the window, not dramatically, just a few inches, but enough to notice if you were paying attention. I approached the mirror slowly, studying the reflected room like a photograph I was trying to decode. Everything was similar, but shifted. The bed appeared to be made differently, the pillows arranged with more care. The suitcase I could see in reality cast no shadow in the reflection, while objects that didn't exist in my room left clear shadows on the reflected floor. When I raised my hand to touch the glass surface, my reflection raised its hand too. But in the reflected room, something else raised its hand as well. A shadow behind the moved chair, a shape that belonged to someone sitting where I couldn't see them. My reflection touched the mirror. The shadow in the other room waved back. I jerked my hand away. The shadow continued waving for several seconds longer than it should have. A greeting or goodbye that lingered in the glass like an afterimage. Then it settled back into stillness, though I could sense it remained there, watching from a chair positioned just outside the frame of what the mirror chose to show me. I brushed my teeth facing away from the bathroom mirror, showered with my eyes closed, dressed while looking at the floor instead of my reflection. But when I returned to the main room, the mirror near the closet demanded attention. The reflected room had changed again. Different flowers on the wallpaper, smaller, more delicate, as if the pattern was aging in reverse. I decided to test it systematically, moved my suitcase to different positions around the room while watching the reflection. In reality, the suitcase cast normal shadows and displaced air like any solid object. In the mirror, the space it occupied remained empty, but other objects appeared there instead. A lamp I'd never seen, books stacked on a table that didn't exist in my version of the room. The books looked familiar, titles I couldn't quite read, but shapes I thought I recognized. I leaned closer to the mirror, trying to make out the words on the spines. As I focused, the text became clearer. My handwriting, journals I'd kept years ago, diaries I'd thrown away when I moved apartments. But there they were in the reflected room, waiting on a table I couldn't touch. I knocked on the mirror's surface. The sound was solid, normal, glass behaving like glass. But something knocked back from the other side. 3 precise taps that echoed my rhythm exactly. I tried a different pattern, 4 quick taps, then 2 slow ones. The response came immediately. Same pattern, but the timing was just slightly off, as if someone was learning the rhythm instead of simply mimicking it. I spent an hour testing different sequences, clapping, stamping, even humming. Each sound received a response from behind the glass. But the responses grew more confident as time passed, less like echoes and more like conversation. By the end of the hour, the responses were arriving before I finished making the sounds, anticipating my rhythms instead of following them. The afternoon stretched longer than physics should have allowed. I watched the light change outside my window, but the sun seemed to be moving backwards. Shadows shortened when they should have lengthened. The clock on the nightstand showed the same time for 3 hours straight, though I could hear it ticking steadily. When evening finally arrived, I closed the curtains in my room and watched the curtains in the mirror move independently. Someone else was adjusting their window covering from the other side. Someone who might have been me, but wasn't quite me. Someone who lived in a room that shared the same space as mine, but existed in a slightly different version of the world. I left all the lights on again that night. Not just the bathroom light, but every lamp and overhead fixture. The room blazed like a small sun, but the mirror continued showing its parallel darkness. In the reflection, night had already settled completely. I could see the silhouette in the chair more clearly now. It looked like a woman about my age, sitting very still, hands folded in her lap, waiting for something that might never come, or might have already arrived years ago. Before trying to sleep, I positioned myself where I could watch the mirror without appearing to watch it. The woman in the chair never moved, but occasionally other shadows passed behind her. Quick movements that suggested other people living other lives in other versions of the same room. A hotel that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, with guests who had checked in from different decades, different possibilities, different choices that led to the same brass key growing warm in the same desk drawer. The next morning brought rain that sounded like typing on the windows, constant, rhythmic, purposeful. I decided to call my sister just to hear a voice that belonged to my actual life. The phone signal showed full strength, though I was certain there had been no signal during the cab ride yesterday. Technology seemed negotiable here, available when the inn decided it should be. I dialed Sarah's number. She answered on the first ring, but the voice that came through the speaker made me drop the phone. It was mine. Not exactly mine, but close enough to make my skin crawl. A little slower in cadence, a little more curious about things that hadn't happened yet. "Hey," the voice said through the fallen phone. "You okay?" I picked up the device with shaking hands. "Sarah? No, it's you. Are you feeling all right? You sound confused." The voice was coming from my sister's phone number, but it was my voice speaking Sarah's words. I hung up immediately. The phone remained silent for exactly 30 seconds, then rang. Same number. I let it go to voicemail. The message that recorded was my voice leaving myself a voicemail. "I'm worried about you," it said. "Call me back when you figure out who you're supposed to be talking to." I sat on the bed and stared at the phone until it rang again. This time I answered but didn't speak first. "I know you're there," my voice said from the other end. "You called me. remember? Yesterday, you told me everything about the hotel, about the room that changes, about the mirror that shows what might have been instead of what is. I didn't call anyone yesterday. You did, though. You told me about the cab driver who never blinked, about the woman with sea glass eyes who knew your room number, about the brass key that stays warm even when you're not touching it. The phone felt heavier with each word. I hadn't told anyone those details, hadn't spoken to Sarah in over a week, but my own voice was describing my experiences with the familiarity of someone who had lived them too. What did I say about today? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. That you would try to understand what's happening, that you would test the boundaries, that you would discover the room isn't really a room at all, but something pretending to be a room until you're comfortable enough to see what it actually is. I hung up. The phone immediately rang again. Different number this time. My work. I answered without thinking. Hello? My voice again, but this time it sounded tired, older. I've been waiting for you to call me back. Who is this? I'm you, about 3 days from now, after you understand why you're really here. After you stop trying to leave and start trying to remember. Remember what? Why you booked this room in the first place. Not this week. The first time. Years ago. When you were 22 and desperate enough to make promises you couldn't keep. The line went dead. I threw the phone onto the bed and backed away from it like it might explode. But it just lay there, silent and innocent. A normal device that had somehow become a conduit for conversations with versions of myself that existed in different time streams. I tried calling my parents. My voice answered, young and frightened. Tried calling my best friend from college. My voice again, but laughing at jokes I hadn't made yet. Every number in my contacts connected me to myself. Different ages, different emotional states, but always my voice explaining things I didn't remember learning. The conversation that disturbed me most was with myself at 16, young and eager, talking about writing a story about a hotel room that existed before it was built, a place where people could check into possibilities instead of realities. It's going to be amazing, my teenage voice said. I'm going to write myself into the story. I'm going to live there. I hadn't thought about that story idea in over a decade. Had forgotten I'd ever considered writing about hotels or impossible rooms or keys that stayed warm. But apparently some version of myself had never forgotten. Had been working toward this moment for years, planning and preparing and sending confirmation emails before decisions were made. That afternoon, my phone showed 17 missed calls, all from my own numbers at different points in time. The voicemails were a timeline of my voice aging and changing, documenting a conversation I was having with myself across multiple decades. Past me giving warnings to present me. Future me offering advice to past me, all of us trying to coordinate something that couldn't be coordinated because time doesn't work that way. Except here, apparently, it did. The final voicemail was from myself tomorrow morning. The voice sounded calm, resigned. Stop trying to call out, it said. The only person you can reach is yourself. The only person who can help you understand is the person you were before you decided this was a good idea. She's in the mirror. She's been waiting for you to notice her. She's been trying to remind you why you came here. I looked at the mirror near the closet. The woman in the chair was facing toward me now instead of toward the window. I could see her face clearly for the first time. It was mine, but younger. The face I had when I was 22 and still believed I could write myself into any story I wanted. She raised her hand and pointed at the phone I was holding. Then she pointed at herself. Then she mouthed words I could read clearly. Answer when you call. Hunger eventually drove me downstairs, though the concept of downstairs had become questionable. The elevator responded to my presence like a well-trained pet, doors opening before I summoned it, carrying me to floors that might or might not correspond to the building's actual architecture. The lobby appeared unchanged from yesterday, but I was beginning to understand that unchanged didn't mean constant here. A different person stood behind the front desk. Male, tall, wearing a sweater that looked hand-knitted by someone who had loved him once. His smile was automatic, but not unkind. The kind of expression people develop when they've answered the same questions too many times, but still want to be helpful. I was wondering about breakfast hours, I said, approaching the counter carefully. Simple question. Innocent, the kind any guest might ask. He tilted his head slightly, studying me with curiosity that felt genuine. I'm sorry, which room are you staying in? 503, corner suite, 5th floor. His expression shifted. Confusion replaced helpfulness. He turned to check something behind the counter, fingers moving through files with practiced efficiency. When he looked up again, his smile had become apologetic. I'm afraid that floor is closed for renovation. Has been for about 6 months now. Are you sure you don't mean 403? That's our corner suite. No. I pulled the brass key from my pocket, still warm, still substantial. 503. I checked in yesterday with the woman who was working then. Sea glass eyes, pale cardigan. He studied the key as if it were written in a language he didn't recognize. May I see that for a moment? I hesitated, then handed it over. The metal felt reluctant to leave my palm, like it preferred my touch to his. He examined the engraving, turned it over, held it up to the light filtering through windows that should have shown morning, but somehow suggested afternoon. This is definitely our key, he said slowly. But the number? He trailed off, reaching under the counter for a thick ledger that looked older than the building itself. Pages rustled as he searched through entries written in different hands across different decades. Here, he said finally, pointing to a line near the bottom of a page. Room 503 was sealed in 1968. Structural issues, never reopened. I slept there last night. That's impossible. But his certainty wavered as he spoke. He looked at the key again, then at me, then at something behind me that made his face go pale. Let me check the registry. The computer screen glowed as he typed, but I could see the reflection in his glasses. No room 503 in the system, no record of it ever existing. He scrolled through floor plans, booking histories, maintenance records. Nothing. As if the room I'd been staying in had been edited out of reality. Would you mind if I walked up there with you? He asked. Just to verify? We took the elevator together. He pressed the button for the 5th floor, but nothing happened. He pressed it again, harder. The button didn't light up, didn't respond, as if it were decorative rather than functional. "That's odd," he murmured, pressing the button for the 4th floor instead. "Let's try the stairs." But the stairwell only went to the 4th floor. Above that, solid wall. No stairs leading higher. No access to a 5th floor that shouldn't exist, but where I definitely spent 2 nights sleeping in a bed that was too comfortable for something imaginary. "I don't understand," he said, staring at the wall where stairs should continue. "The building has 5 floors. I can see the windows from outside." I could feel the brass key warming in my pocket, growing hot enough to be uncomfortable. When I touched it, the metal felt almost alive, responding to proximity to something it recognized, something it belonged to. "Maybe we should go outside," I suggested. "Look at the building from there." We walked around to the parking area where I'd arrived yesterday. The building rose 3 stories above us. Clean brick, neat windows, architectural lines that made sense. No 5th floor visible, no corner suite, no windows that should have shown me the view I'd been looking at for 2 days. 3 stories, he said, though he sounded confused by his own observation. But I could have sworn. I counted the windows, matched them to rooms I could see from the lobby. Everything corresponded to a 3-story building that had never been anything else. But the key in my pocket continued radiating heat, insisting on the existence of something that apparently wasn't there. "Where did you sleep last night?" he asked. I couldn't answer, because the logical answer was nowhere. The room I'd paid for didn't exist. The bed I'd slept in couldn't be found. The mirror that showed me alternative versions of myself was apparently reflecting something from a space that had been sealed or never built or edited out of the world by forces that understood architecture differently than physics suggested. We returned to the lobby in silence. He handed me back the key, but avoided touching my skin when he did, as if the warmth radiating from the brass might be contagious. "I'll need to call my manager," he said. "This is beyond anything I know how to handle." I took the key and walked back toward the elevator. The button for the 5th floor remained dark and unresponsive for him. But when I pressed it alone, it glowed softly, and the elevator rose smoothly to a floor that didn't exist, carrying me back to a room that couldn't be found, where I could continue staying in a space that was simultaneously sealed, non-existent, and more real than anything else I'd ever experienced. The registry said I wasn't there. The building's architecture said my room was impossible. But the brass key said otherwise, and I was beginning to trust its version of reality more than anyone else's. I kept a journal during every trip, had since college. Small leather book, lined pages, black ink that flowed smoothly from whatever pen happened to be working that day. Writing by hand helped me process experiences that felt too large or strange for simple memory. This trip deserved documentation more than most. But when I opened the journal that evening, planning to record everything that had happened since arriving, I found pages already filled. My handwriting, definitely, but entries I'd never written, dates that extended into next week, descriptions of events I hadn't experienced yet. The first entry was dated yesterday, before I'd even arrived. The cab driver hummed the whole way here, it read. Same tune Mom used to sing when she thought I was asleep. How did he know that song? How did he know I needed to hear it? I'd never mentioned that song to anyone, had barely remembered it myself until reading those words. But now I could recall my mother's voice, soft and slightly off-key, drifting through the hallway outside my childhood bedroom. A melody that felt like safety when everything else felt uncertain. The next entry was dated this morning. The mirror shows what I would have chosen if I'd been braver at 22. She looks happy there, happier than I ever managed to look. Sometimes I wonder if she can see me too, if she knows how sorry I am for the choices that led away from her life. My hands shook as I read. I had wondered that exact thing while watching the woman in the chair. Had felt guilty for paths not taken, decisions avoided, safety chosen over possibility. But I'd never written those thoughts down, hadn't even fully formed them into conscious ideas. I flipped ahead. The entries grew stranger as the dates progressed. Tomorrow's entry described a conversation with the hotel staff about renovation schedules. They're going to start work on the 6th floor next week, it said. Apparently it's been sealed since the incident in 1943. They won't say what happened, but the blueprints show scorch marks around what used to be room 606. Some fires burned for decades without flame. There was no 6th floor. I'd verified that this afternoon. The building had 3 stories, period, but my handwriting insisted otherwise, describing architectural details and historical events with the confidence of someone who had researched thoroughly. The entry for 3 days from now made my stomach turn. I tried to leave today, packed everything, paid the bill that doesn't exist for the room that can't be found. But the road only leads back here. Every direction, every choice. The cab driver was waiting when I gave up and turned around, still humming, still not blinking. "Ready to check into your real room now?" he asked. I think I said yes. I closed the journal and set it aside, but it fell open again to a page near the back. Future entries written in handwriting that grew progressively more frantic. Week 3. The mirror woman tried to warn me, kept pointing at the door, mouthing, "Leave now." But I couldn't hear her through the glass, couldn't read her lips clearly enough. By the time I understood what she was saying, it was too late to take her advice. Month 2. The other guests are starting to notice me. They nod when I pass in the hallway, smile like they recognize something familiar, like they've been waiting for me to join whatever club they accidentally became members of. The woman at the front desk gave me a discount for extended stays. Most people only need a few days to understand, she said. But some require more time to remember why they came. Year 1. I finished a story I came here to write, about a woman who books a hotel room that doesn't exist yet, who checks into possibility instead of reality, who discovers that some vacations are permanent and some destinations choose their visitors instead of the other way around. It's a good story. True, mostly. I left it on the desk for whoever comes next. They'll need the instruction manual. The final entry was dated 5 years from now. The handwriting had changed, steadier, more resigned. New guest in 503 today. Young woman, about 26. Looks confused by the confirmation email she never sent. I tried to warn her from the mirror, but she can't see me clearly yet. Can't hear what I'm trying to tell her. She'll understand eventually. They always do. Time works differently here. Eventually becomes always, and always becomes forever. But forever isn't as long as it sounds when you're writing the story instead of just living it. I threw the journal across the room. It hit the wall and fell open to a blank page that immediately began filling itself with words I wasn't writing. Day 4 appeared in my handwriting. I found the journal entries I'm going to write. They scared me enough to throw the book away. But it came back. They always come back. The story has to finish itself somehow. I retrieved the journal and watched more words appear. The mirror woman is pointing at the journal now. She looks frantic, like she's trying to tell me something important about the pages I haven't read yet, about the pages that are still writing themselves, about the difference between predicting the future and creating it, one word at a time. I flipped to the very last page, empty except for a single line written in red ink that looks suspiciously like blood. The only way out is to write yourself a different ending. Below that, in fresher black ink that was still wet, my handwriting added, "But first you have to understand what story you're actually in." Sleep had become theoretical. I would lie down, close my eyes, drift toward unconsciousness, then wake to the sound of walls shifting, not dramatically, just tiny adjustments. Like the room was breathing, expanding on the inhale, holding the new space when it exhaled. By morning, everything was a few inches farther from everything else. I started measuring, used my steps to pace the distance from bed to window, window to door, door to bathroom. 23 steps from bed to window on the first night, 25 the second night. By the fourth night, 28. The room was growing, but so gradually that the change felt natural, like watching a child age, unnoticeable day by day, undeniable over time. The closet had moved farthest from its original position. What started as an arm's length from the bed now required a deliberate walk to reach. The mirror inside reflected a version of the room that remained the original size, creating an optical contradiction that made my eyes water when I focused on it too long. I tried marking the walls with pen ink, small dots near the corners where furniture met architectural lines. But the marks moved with the expansion, maintaining their relative positions as the space stretched, as if the room was growing from some central point I couldn't locate, pulling everything outward proportionally. The woman in the mirror was trying to tell me something about the expansion. She kept pointing at the corners of her room, then at her mouth, speaking words I couldn't hear through the glass. Her gestures grew more urgent each night, but the sound barrier between our realities remained absolute. On the fifth night, I woke to find the bathroom door farther away than I could reach without getting up. The distance had become inconvenient, then concerning, then genuinely problematic. What started as a hotel room was becoming something closer to a small apartment. By morning, it might be a warehouse. I called the front desk. The same man answered, the one who couldn't find my room in the registry. "The space is expanding," I told him. Long pause. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" "My room is getting bigger every night. The walls are moving apart." "That's..." Another pause. "That's not physically possible." "Nothing about this room is physically possible. Can you send someone up to look?" "I can't send anyone to a room that doesn't exist." "Then come yourself. Use the key." "I don't have access to sealed rooms. It's not sealed if I'm staying in it." The conversation continued in circles until I hung up, But an hour later, someone knocked on my door. A woman I'd never seen before. Older, wearing coveralls that suggested maintenance work. She carried a toolbox and wore an expression of professional curiosity. "Heard you're having space issues," she said when I opened the door. "You can see me. You can see the door." "Course I can. I'm the only one who can access the sealed rooms. Been maintaining them for 30 years. They don't show up in the computer system, but they still need attention." She walked into my room and whistled softly. "Hasn't expanded this much in decades. Usually takes years to get this big. You must be a strong dreamer." "What does that mean?" "Some people dream small, neat little dreams that fit in normal spaces. Others dream big enough to require extra room. The building accommodates both kinds, but it takes energy to expand reality. Most guests don't generate enough psychic pressure to push the walls around." She opened her toolbox and pulled out a measuring device I didn't recognize. Something that looked like a cross between a stethoscope and a compass. She held it against the walls, listening to sounds I couldn't hear. "Still growing," she announced. "Rates accelerating too. At this pace, you'll be looking at airplane hangar proportions within a week." "How do I make it stop?" "Why would you want to? Most people come here because they need more space. Inner space, usually, but it manifests as outer space if you're doing it right." She moved the device to different positions around the room, tracking something that registered on her instrument, but not on any of my senses. "Problem isn't the expansion," she continued. "Problem is when it starts expanding faster than you can handle. When the room gets so big you can't find yourself in it anymore." The bathroom was now far enough away that I couldn't see the door clearly. The space between my bed and the window had become a journey rather than a few steps. I was losing the room even as it grew larger around me. "The mirror woman's trying to tell you something," the maintenance worker said, noticing where I was looking. She went through this same process. Her room expanded until she couldn't reach the exit anymore. That's why she's stuck in the reflection. Too much space, not enough navigation skills. What's she trying to say? Same thing I'm trying to say. Don't let the expansion happen faster than you can map it. Stay oriented. Keep track of where you are in relation to where you started. Most people get lost in the extra space and never find their way back to the door. She packed up her tools and headed toward the exit, which now seemed impossibly far away. "I'll check on you tomorrow," she called back, "if you're still locatable." After she left, I spent the rest of the day walking the perimeter of my expanding room, trying to understand its new geography. The mirror near the closet had moved so far from the bed that reaching it required genuine effort. But when I finally arrived, the woman in the reflection was pointing not at the corners of her room, but at her own mouth. She was speaking a single word over and over, with the exaggerated lip movements of someone trying to communicate across impossible distance. I focused on reading her lips. The word she was repeating looked like center. She pointed at herself, then at a spot in her reflected room, then back at her mouth. "Center," she was saying. "Find the center." I looked around my expanded room, trying to locate whatever she meant. But with the walls so far apart and the furniture scattered across such vast space, finding the center of anything felt like a geometric impossibility. the room had grown too large for human measurement, too big for a single person to comprehend all at once. But somewhere in all that expanded space was the point from which everything was growing, the heart of the expansion. If I could find it, maybe I could understand why my presence was making reality stretch like elastic around possibilities I'd never consciously chosen. Morning found me standing at the approximate center of what my room had become overnight. The space now resembled a small gymnasium more than hotel accommodation. I could barely see the walls from where I stood, and reaching any piece of furniture required planning and commitment. The bathroom had become a destination, requiring its own journey. The maintenance woman knocked again, though the sound seemed to come from very far away. I walked toward where I thought the door should be, but it took several minutes to locate it. When I opened it, she looked past me at the vast emptiness that had replaced familiar proportions. "Hangar size," she said, nodding with satisfaction. "Right on schedule. Most people don't achieve this level of expansion until their second visit." "Second visit?" "Oh yes. Usually takes multiple attempts to get the room properly calibrated to your actual space requirements. But you seem to be a natural." She walked into the room with the confidence of someone who understood its geography better than I did. Her footsteps echoed in the expanded space, creating sounds that suggested the ceiling had also risen to accommodate whatever was happening here. "The front desk staff are probably getting nervous about now," she continued, setting down her toolbox in what used to be the center of the room. "Room expansions always make them uncomfortable. Messes with their filing systems." "What filing systems?" "Guest registries, architectural plans, insurance documents, the paper trail that proves the building makes sense. When rooms start changing size, the documentation stops matching reality. Makes everyone anxious except maintenance staff." She opened her toolbox and pulled out what looked like rolled architectural drawings. "Thought you might want to see these. Found them while researching your expansion rate. Seemed relevant." The blueprints were old, hand-drawn lines on paper that had yellowed with age. The building's original construction plans dated 1942. But these showed 5 floors, not 3. 5 floors with room numbers that included spaces the current building insisted didn't exist. "5th floor," she said, pointing to the top level of the drawing. Original plans included 12 rooms up there, all specialty accommodations for guests with unusual space requirements. I studied the blueprint more carefully. Room 503 was clearly marked, located exactly where I thought my room should be. But there were notes written in the margins, handwritten annotations in different inks, added over decades by people who had worked on the building. Add expansion capacity to 503. Read one note, dated 1968. Guest will require unlimited growth potential. Install reality anchors in 503, read another from 1975. Previous guest achieved infinite space but couldn't navigate back to entrance. Seal 503 temporarily, said a note from 1981. Await guest who can handle the responsibility. But the note that made my hands shake was written in fresh black ink, dated last month. Prepare 503 for arrival. Guest name confirmed through temporal booking system. Below that, in the same handwriting, my full name, birth date, and current address? How is my name on a blueprint from last month when I didn't decide to come here until last week? The maintenance woman smiled with the expression of someone explaining something obvious to a child. Time works differently when you're expanding space. The room starts making accommodations before you consciously decide you need them. It's been preparing for your specific requirements for months. She unrolled another drawing. This one showed the room as it existed now, post-expansion. But it also showed projected growth patterns, lines indicating where the walls would move next, space calculations for furniture arrangements I hadn't thought of yet, plans for bathroom relocations and window installations that would accommodate views I hadn't requested. According to these projections, she said, you'll need aircraft hangar proportions within 3 days, stadium size by next week. After that, she shrugged. After that, we're in uncharted territory. The building's never had a guest who required infinite space before. What happened to the others? The ones who expanded too fast? Some found their way back to normal dimensions. Some didn't. Some are still expanding somewhere, presumably happy with unlimited room to grow. Hard to say. Once a guest achieves true infinite space, they become impossible to contact through conventional means. I looked around at what my room had become. Even standing in the center, I couldn't see the walls clearly. The space felt more like an outdoor area than an enclosed room. If this continued, I would lose all reference points, all ability to navigate back to anything recognizable. The woman in the mirror, I said. She's trying to warn me about something. She achieved infinite expansion in 1981. Same room, same process. But she couldn't find her way back to the exit once the space became unmappable. She's been living at the reflection ever since, trying to communicate with subsequent guests. What's she trying to tell me? To stop expanding before you lose the center. To choose finite space while you can still remember where the door is located. The blueprints showed one more detail I hadn't noticed initially. A small notation near room 503. Emergency contraction protocol available until guest exceeds cathedral proportions. After that point, expansion becomes permanent and irreversible. I looked around my gymnasium-sized room and tried to estimate how much larger it was than a cathedral. The answer was uncomfortable. If these expansions continued at their current rate, I had perhaps one more night to decide whether unlimited space was what I actually wanted, or whether I preferred the comfort of walls close enough to touch when I needed something solid to lean against. The room had become unmappable by morning. Standing in what I thought was the center, I could no longer see any walls. The space stretched beyond the horizon in every direction, like an indoor prairie that happened to have a ceiling somewhere far above my head. My bed was visible in the distance, a small rectangle that required effort to locate. I packed my suitcase, though the term packing had lost meaning when it took 20 minutes to walk from my bed to the closet. The brass key had grown so hot in my pocket that I could barely touch it. When I finally retrieved my belongings and made the journey to where the door should be, I found myself in what felt like navigating a warehouse-sized space to find a single exit. But there was no front desk staff when I arrived in the lobby. No guests in the common areas. No sound except my footsteps echoing in empty space that felt larger than it should, but not as infinitely expanded as my room had become. I set the brass key on the counter and waited. No one came. After an hour, I picked up the key and walked outside. The parking lot was empty except for my shadow, which stretched across asphalt in a direction that didn't match the sun's position. No cars, no other people, no sounds of life from the surrounding area that had seemed modestly populated when I arrived. Just silence and the feeling of being the only conscious thing for miles in any direction. I started walking toward the road. The path was clear, the pavement solid under my feet. But after walking for what felt like an hour, I looked back to find the hotel still directly behind me. Not smaller in the distance, not diminished by space. Exactly the same size and position as when I'd started walking away from it. I tried a different direction, same result. No matter which path I chose, no matter how long I walked, the hotel remained constant in my peripheral vision. Always the same distance away. Always positioned as if I'd never moved at all. My phone showed no signal, but that had become normal. What wasn't normal was the GPS, displaying a blinking dot that remained stationary even as I walked. According to the satellite tracking, I was still in room 503, still standing in a space that didn't exist according to building records, but apparently existed enough to maintain my location coordinates. I sat down on what appeared to be a real road leading to real destinations, but the asphalt felt warm under my hands, the same brass key warmth that had been following me since arrival. The road itself was part of the hotel, part of the expansion, part of the space that grew to accommodate whatever I needed, including the illusion of leaving. A cab materialized through heat shimmer that might have been mist, the same yellow car, the same driver who never blinked. He pulled up beside me and tapped the meter. "Ready to check into your real room now?" he asked. I looked back at the hotel. 3 stories, exactly as it had appeared when I first arrived. No sign of the expanded spaces I'd been experiencing. No indication that room 503 was large enough to contain its own weather systems. "What's my real room?" "The one you've been staying in all along. Just took you a while to understand its actual dimensions." I got into the cab. He drove me back to the hotel, a journey that took exactly 30 seconds despite having walked for hours in the same direction. The woman with sea glass eyes was behind the front desk again, as if she'd never left. "Enjoy your stay?" she asked, though I hadn't returned the key yet. "I'm trying to check out." "Course you are. That's part of the process. Everyone tries to check out eventually. Most people discover they never actually checked in to begin with." She handed me a receipt for services I'd never requested: room expansion, reality anchor installation, temporal booking coordination, mirror communication services. The total was exactly $0. Payment had been made through alternative consideration, according to the itemized bill. What alternative consideration? The story you're going to write about this place. The one that brings the next guest who needs unlimited space to grow into possibilities they haven't imagined yet. I looked around the lobby. Everything appeared normal-sized, comprehensible, the kind of space humans were designed to navigate comfortably. But when I touched the brass key in my pocket, it connected me immediately to the vast room upstairs. The expanded space I could return to whenever I needed more room than reality typically provided. I can come back. You never left. Room 503 exists whenever you need it to exist. the booking confirmation was just letting you know it had always been available, the expansion was just showing you how much space you actually require. She pointed toward the elevator. Your room is ready whenever you are. Same key, same space. But now you understand how to navigate it properly, how to find the center when you need orientation, how to expand when you need growth, how to contract when you need comfort. I took the elevator to the 5th floor that didn't exist according to building records, but existed perfectly according to my needs. My room was hotel-sized again, manageable proportions. But when I looked in the mirror near the closet, I could see the infinite version in the reflection. The woman who had been trying to warn me was gone. She'd found her way back to the regular dimensions, leaving behind a space that was available whenever I needed room to become larger than I'd been before. The brass key had cooled to normal temperature, but it remained warm enough to remind me that some vacations are permanent, some destinations choose their visitors, and some rooms exist before they're built, waiting for the people who need them enough to believe in spaces that expand to accommodate dreams that are too big for ordinary architecture to contain. Outside my window, I could see the ocean that had been promised in the original listing. Real water, real waves, real horizon. But when I needed it to be, the view could stretch infinitely in directions that didn't exist on any map except the one I was learning to draw for myself. One expanded possibility at a time.